Welcome to the Beverage Click podcast, the only podcast where we discuss drinking trends with an Asian perspective. I'm your resident host, Sean O, certified beverage specialist and co-founder of the Beverage Click Academy in Singapore and Malaysia. And here is this month's episode. Welcome back, my drinking comrades. Today, we're heading to Portugal, and more specifically, to one of its most historic and important wine names, Casa Ferreirinha. Joining me is Fernando Garcia-Agulló Guedes, a fourth-generation member of the founding family behind Soul Grape. That makes this conversation especially meaningful because we're not just talking to someone representing the brand commercially, but someone carrying part of that family legacy forward. Casa Ferreirinha is a name deeply tied to the Douro and to the wider story of Portuguese wines. It's a house that helped establish the Douro as a source of serious still wines far beyond its long-standing fame for port. So today, we'll be exploring not just the wines themselves, but also the people, place, history, and the unique identity of this remarkable region. All right, welcome back, my drinking comrades. And today we have a very special guest from all the way from Portugal. We're currently in Wulu Mulu Steakhouse. They're hosting a trade and media lunch, at which I'm very thankful to be invited. For Fernando, for the listeners meeting you for the first time, what's your role at Casa Ferreirinha?
So Sean, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you. So we're here to talk about the Casa Ferreirinha. So we're a small producer in the Douro region, so east of Porto, in the north of Portugal. And my role at Casa Ferreirinha, first of all, I'm part of the fourth generation of the owning family. But also, in terms of Casa Ferreirinha, I'm the one managing our portfolio. So all in terms of marketing and also helping the sales team to showcase our wines and tell our story.
I'm doing a bit of research and looking back at history. Casa Ferreirinha actually has a very historic name. To your mind, would you explain in one sentence as someone who has not associated Douro with port? Usually they tend to think that it's a portified region, so
Absolutely.
In your mind?
No, it's something that we're trying to demystify, right? So the Douro is known for its port wines. Historically, we've been producing mainly ports. But to be honest, in the last year, still wine production has overcome port production. So in general numbers, 60% of production was mainly port and 40% was still wines. Last year, this was reversed. So it's not 60-40, but it's 55 still wines, 45 port. So the region is changing, also because of the regulations of port production, but we can see a shift towards still winemaking. To be honest, in one sentence, Casa Ferreirinha is Douro, right? So we're not a producer in a specific location in the Douro. We cover the entire Douro. We represent the entire Douro. And so in a small sentence, Douro equals Casa Ferreirinha or Casa Ferreirinha equals the Douro.
Wow, that's a huge statement. In that sense, it sounds of authority and leadership. What does that actually mean to today's terms in terms of vineyards, research, winemaking, or even market presence? You mentioned about market presence being 55%, was it?
Yeah, production. 55% still wines.
Yeah.
We were pioneers in still winemaking. In 1952, we launched the first ever great still wine in the Douro called Barca-Velha. And although this looked like a modern approach, our philosophy was super traditional. So we like to say that we mix tradition with modernity, right? Or tradition with innovation. But basically what happened is we used the philosophy of port winemaking in the region, and we converted it into using winemaking techniques learned outside. So in France, Italy, and Spain, we converted them into still wine. So using the traditional port making philosophy, we did still wines in 1952. However, the region is known for producing still wines since the 19th century. However, these weren't really high quality wines. These were wines usually known as claret and palette, which are light-bodied wines, normally made with leftovers that weren't used for port winemaking.
Okay, interesting. How do you actually keep styles consistent across vintages? Because clearly there is a house style or a signature to it. Is there an approach to keeping wines consistent?
Our philosophy is, as I said, using the port philosophy. So the port philosophy is using many different altitudes. And maybe some of the listeners don't know, the Douro is a mountainous region. So we can go from 80 meters up to 600 meters. That's the maximum legal altitude to produce wines in the Douro. And so our consistency is all about blending. So we're a blending region. And so we blend low altitude grape varieties or plantations with high altitude plantations. So we can mix the vibrant acidity of high altitudes with concentration and ripeness of low altitude varieties. And so it's all about consistency. And so our style, the style of our wines, as I said, Casa Ferreirinha, is not a specific point in the region. We cover the entire region. So our wines vary. What they have in general is consistency above all. So using these altitudes, because the style varies from where they're located. So we try to express the maximum of where each wine is born.
So you would usually select different sites, etc., to make the blend. Okay, that makes perfect sense. And thank you for covering the part on altitude, because to give the listeners a little bit more background on how Douro is, not everybody has the privilege to have visited place. I actually visited it because of the port program previously. Maybe you could just explain a little bit more about how the geography is like in Douro.
So they said the Douro is the northern part of Portugal, and it's located east side of Porto. So I'd say it's 100 kilometers from the seaside into the east, and it goes all the way towards Spain. And so in general numbers, from the west coast to the eastern side of Portugal, you would have 350 kilometers of distance. I'd say the Douro covers around 250 kilometers. So it's a very wide region. The cool thing about the Douro is it's protected from the Atlantic influence. So there's this mountain area called Serra do Marão, which basically protects the region from all the Atlantic influences. And so basically the Douro is divided into 3 sub-regions, all of them very different. So you've got the Baixo Douro, which is close to Serra do Marão, so more Atlantic, which is heavy rain, there's more vegetation, bigger yields. And so mainly here, it's good for not only, but mostly entry-level wines due to the yield of the grapes, but also whites. So there's better conditions for white. Then as you move towards the east, you reach to the most known part of the Douro, which is Cima Córrego. And here is, we can call it the capital of the Douro. And Pinhão is the heart of the Douro. And here you've got more variations in terms of altitude. So you can go up to, from 50 up to 600, as I said, so bigger variations. And mainly ports come from this specific region. And then in the farther east side, where most of Casa Ferreirinha wines are produced, still wines, we call it Douro Superior. And so this is...
It's a newer region.
It's most recent region. So the Douro Superior was mainly for crops. So it was used for agricultural purposes, but never for wine. If not the first, one of the first plant vineyards there. And as time passed, we understood the importance of this sub-region for still wine, but especially reds, because it is continental climate. So really extreme warm conditions during the summer, during the day especially, and then at nights it cools down. So temperature variations are high here, which is great for wineries because during the day grapes mature and during the night they are able to relax and maintain the freshness of each varieties.
I see. I would assume that the winery actually has vineyards in all 3 sub-regions. Are there bigger threats or viticultural challenges? Because I know some would be a little bit more continental, some would be a little bit more maritime, for example. What are the pressures that you actually face?
Well, focusing on the Douro Superior, which I think is where we have the biggest challenges, like with extreme heat, the vines shut down to protect themselves. And when they shut down, they try to recover the nutrients and the resources they need to flourish. The biggest challenge here is for us to prepare them for this period of shutting down. And so here we implement new pruning techniques, canopy management, water management systems. One thing that we started doing in the past 10 to 15 years is creating natural vegetation areas, because natural vegetation areas not only helps the local ecosystem to be more balanced, but it cools down the environment. And so this helps the vineyards to have a more balanced vegetative cycle.
There's a lot of mention about altitude, exposure, soil, but practically speaking, if you are tasting the wines, how does it actually manifest in the glass when we're tasting Douro wines?
Altitude in the Douro is becoming subject, like a hot subject. Altitude was never seen in the Douro as necessary. The Douro was ports, the Douro then was reds, and now whites are becoming a thing. And so we've been investing a lot in altitude. And altitude is clear, is very evident in the wines because you can feel the freshness and the acidity of the wine. So as higher you go, the maturity cycle is bigger because they don't mature as fast as if you were down below. And so the grapes are able to maintain their acidity, their natural acidity. Altitude is a key important factor in the style of Douro wines now.
Especially in this time of day and age, because clearly we are going through a little bit of global warming, I'd say. As the Douro, yeah, it's quite evident, I mean. Yeah. Has the climate significantly changed in the last decade?
Absolutely. First of all, the climate is unexpected. So we're always looking at extremes. I can tell you about this last year. So this beginning of the year, we had snow in the Douro. And after the snow period, we had not really warm days, but we had 20 degrees days. For winter in the Douro, it's quite high. So just from January to March, we had snow and we had warm weather. And so this is, for us, really hard to predict. And so it's a huge challenge for us to be able to manage this because not every year is the same. Every year is different. And we always get extreme weather conditions in the region. And so being able to adapt to this is our biggest challenge.
Yeah. Aside from altitude, which cools down the sites, are there any other measures, perhaps, to try and maintain freshness? Maybe early harvest?
Early harvest for sure. Been anticipating the harvest maybe 2-3 weeks in the last 10 years. So early harvest, absolutely. In regions or in areas where we have old vines, field blends, as a field blend in the Douro is very common. It's the old ways we're having field blends. And in field blend, you can have different varieties, but not only varieties, but also grapes. So you can have red and white grapes in the same vineyard. And so sometimes we start picking earlier, but maybe we don't do it once. We do it 2 or 3 times. We have to go through the same vine 3 times to pick each variety at the exact point that we need it to be in order to make our wines, right? In terms of time management is also critical here. Yeah. And apart from this, sun exposure, so exposures of the vineyards, normally the northern ones were the best, but now we have to mix this with other exposures. And also the river. The river is extremely important in the Douro, right? So the river helps us not mitigate, but helps us control the average temperature. So the closest you are to the river, the easier it is to, when it's really cold, to warm up the vineyard, but when it's very warm, to cool it down. So the river is a temperature-controlled mechanism that we have in the region.
And you just talked about field blends, which is an interesting topic for lots of wine enthusiasts. Just to correct people's perception, field blends are basically you go into the vineyard and just harvesting whatever is there and then put it into a blend. But early on, you did mention that there is a bit of a selection process. Was that correct?
No selection process, but a harvesting process. So, as I said, there are many old vineyards and field blends in the Douro. It's becoming less common because people started planting individual varieties separately because each variety flourishes in a different way depending on the soil. And so field blends were the traditional ways of planting varieties in the Douro. And it's not about handpicking, but it's about selecting the best time to harvest each variety. And not everyone does this, but we like to be really precise on our viticulture. And so we want to harvest each variety at the point that we need them to be for our wines. And yes, but I think we should make a point here of what's the difference between field blends and individual varieties. So field blends, normally if you get old vine field blends, these vineyards are often really deep rooted. So that's the beauty of the schist. So the schist is a rock, but instead of being horizontal, it's vertical. And so something that most people don't know is that the schist being vertical rock, it allows the roots of the vineyard to go really deep. And so the older the vineyard, the more resistant this vineyard is towards the climate change. We've got vineyards that are century-old vineyards, and these vineyards are very low yielding, but they produce super elegant wines, even in extreme weather conditions, because they can go really deep and get the nutrients. And in this shut-in period, when they shut down, they're able to still keep producing the nutrients that they need in order to give the best fruit. Whilst individual varieties, it's easier to identify them, but the depth and the complexity is not the same.
Let's talk about the wines. And I know we're going to go through these wines later on during the lunch, but maybe we could talk a little bit about what are the wines being showcased. Perhaps we could start off with the Vineyard Grande.
Yeah. Today we're only showing still wines, and we will show a white wine and then only reds. Casa Ferreirinha is a red house producer, mainly, because typically the Douro was only focusing on ports and then reds, as I said before in the beginning of our conversation. And now there's a trend to move towards whites. Whites are growing, and the Douro region is prepared for whites even more. And so the first one we have is Vinha Grande. And Vinha Grande, it's our entry-level wine. However, it's the second wine we created. So Barca-Velha in 1952 and Vinha Grande in 1960. And a fun fact is that the Douro region was demarcated and regulated for still wines in the 80s, in 1982, if I'm not mistaken. And we started producing 20, 30 years before this. And we believe, and we're proud of contributing to the region in terms of pushing the region towards this new style of wine, so still wines. And Vinha Grande was one of the wines that pushed the region forward. And we consider this wine to be a classic Douro, so produced in the Cima Corvo, as I said, the center of the Douro region. And the idea here is using the same philosophy of Barca-Velha, so using the philosophy of ports, but at a more approachable and accessible point. It's more ready to drink, it's fruit forward, very elegant, produced in high altitudes, whereas Barca-Velha, and we'll speak about it later on, Barca-Velha is a wine that ages for 9 years before being released. And so it takes time to understand it. It's a it's an age-worthy wine. All of our wines are age-worthy, but Barca-Velha can live as long as a vintage port. That's the philosophy of Barca-Velha, vintage port winemaking, age-worthy, in 40 plus years. Recently I tasted a Vinha Grande 97, and I was surprised. For Vinha Grande being able to age for over 25, 30 years, it's incredible.
And that's your flagship, correct?
I said our flagship would be Quinta Leda.
Quinta Leda.
Quinta Leda is our flagship wine. Vinha Grande is the one that we cherish the most because it's our entry-level wine, and sometimes people don't see its true potential, but it is one of the oldest wines of the region, from 1960. It was the wine, as I said, that pushed the region forward, and it's still today alive, and with the same style. So we've never changed the style of this wine. We're always improving the quality, so every year we do it better and better. It's the most cherished.
Oh, well, they sound really, really special. If you had a cheat code for a psalm to introduce Douro wines, what would that be?
Look, if I had a cheat code, we would be everywhere with Douro wines. I think the easiest way to put it is the Douro wines are super versatile and they are underestimated. We are becoming recognized internationally, finally now. Last year, we were grateful for the Wine Enthusiast publication on the Douro region being the region of the year. And so there's a recognition of the region as a whole. I say we're very versatile. We're accessible at every price point, so we over-deliver in quality. And I think in the next 10 to 20 years, you'll find ourselves competing in terms of price point, not in terms of quality, because in quality we're there or over, but in terms of price point, we'll be competing with the best-known regions. So the cheat code I say is don't be afraid of showing Douro wines, because your customers won't be disappointed.
Okay, good to know. Now, because of time, we need to do a bit of a closing. Now, because it's not a tradition, but it's more about just giving people snapshots of what Douro wines is. So I'm just going to do a bit of a rapid fire questions, and you could just answer accordingly.
Yeah.
One word to describe Douro.
Diversity.
Aromas you associate with schist-grown Douro reds.
You've got Touriga Franca, which is the main variety, and it's known for Esteva, which is a flower that grows in the Douro. So Esteva is an aroma. And then for us, the Touriga Nacional, which is a violet aroma. And so these are the two aromas that, for me, always flourish in our wines. And these are the main varieties used in the region. So these are varieties that you can feel normally in Douro wines.
I'm not a florist, so I probably need to make a mental note to smell that flower and then in Portugal.
In English is rock rose. I'm not sure about translation.
Oh, well, damn, that's still not familiar to me. No. A vintage condition that you love or fear?
I love the continental climate, so really warm days, and at night you're able to chill down. Yeah. So I feel what the vineyards are feeling in those days. What I fear is heavy rainfall during harvest.
No, because of mildew and
losing crop.
Yeah. The best time to visit Douro for first timers?
First timers, I would say definitely October. So it's just after harvest.
After harvest, okay.
After harvest. You'll still find some people picking grapes, but it's just after harvest, at the end of the summer, beginning of October, and you'll see the Douro. We're starting autumn, right? And so you'll see the Douro yellowish and reddish, and it's incredible because it's a one in a lifetime experience. You see all the different slopes, terraces, and everything is red and yellow.
Cool. What about a bottle in time that perhaps inspired you? Not necessarily yours, but someone else.
I would say it inspired me because I'm not exactly the winemaker, so I wouldn't be inspired by, we do our own style. But I'd say a wine I admire would be Tianello from Antinori. Not only because of the reputation and recognition they've been building throughout the years, but also I think they got the balance of quality and quantity. It's a beautiful wine, and they position it very well. It's a very reputable wine, right? But also at the same time, they can be in many markets and with a good presence. And I respect that, and I admire the wine, and it's one of my favorite wines in the world.
That was a bit of a shout out to Antinori. Finally, a food pairing that always works. It could be a local cuisine with
Portuguese cuisine?
Yeah, it could be. Bacalhau, I don't know.
Well, bacalhau, there's so many dishes of bacalhau. Probably one of the bacalhau dishes, the ones with the heavier and the richer bacalhau dishes would definitely work. My grandfather's favorite dish in the Douro was something called posta amilandesa. And posta is like this steak, thick steak with gravy on top. And that's what he usually would have it. And it's personally one of my favorites as well. I would recommend going to the Douro and having a posta amilandesa with Douro wine.
I will make a point when I'm visiting Douro this time. All right, Fernando, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, and I hope to see you again soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
likewise. Thank you.
After tasting through the wines and hearing Fernando's thoughts, I have to say Casa Ferreirinha left a strong impression on me. First off, the whites. I genuinely think that the white wines are serious contenders, especially for our part of the world. They showed freshness, energy, and a real sense of vibrancy that suits tropical weather beautifully. More importantly, they have that palate cleansing effect with food that makes them very attractive at the dinner table. As for the reds, they were actually less heavy than I expected, and I mean that in the best possible way. There was concentration, there was depth, and the oak use was smart and measured. Nothing felt overdone, and everything felt supported. It was a good reminder that power and elegance can absolutely coexist. Fernando also mentioned to me off mic that the average vine age is around 40 years old, and I think that really showed in the wines. What I also found compelling is their ability to work with altitude and blending. That gives Casa Ferreirinha a lot of room to shape wines with personality and with purpose. Wines that suit changing consumer trends, different cuisines, and different cultural preferences. In markets where reds are still fairly favored, like amongst Chinese or Vietnamese drinkers, that feels relevant. So this was more than just a tasting of a historic house. It was a reminder of how a producer with heritage can still remain dynamic, adaptable, and very much in tune with the modern market. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and send in your questions too. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, follow, and share the podcast. It really helps us to grow the community of drinking comrades.